Well, let's talk to the former head of counter-terrorism at the MOD, Major General Chip Chapman. Chip, it's always good to see you. What's your assessment of where we are 12 months in?
Well, there's an offensive going on 5 or 6 axes in the Donbass, at Luhansk and Donetsk. They don't look like the Russians that they're breaking through at the moment. But neither can we say that there's a stalemate. It seems to me that the Russian offensive has started too early. We're going to get the same problem that they had when they started a year ago. That is Rapistutsa, the mud of spring, and they'll get bogged down there. So what the Ukrainians are doing at the moment is stopping the Russians from exploiting and breaking through in both Luhansk and Donetsk, waiting for their own combat power with the Western tanks and Western supplies to build up for their own offensive operation, probably from May or June, which will probably take the form of striking through Zaporizhia towards Ukraine to sever the Russian forces in Kherson from those in the east. So we haven't reached a stalemate yet, but for Ukraine to prevail, it does require security assistance from the allies to continue. And that's just not military assistance, that's economic assistance and humanitarian assistance. Otherwise, they would fold. But total means, that's your physical power to fight, multiplied by your strength of will, gives you the power of resistance. And that's the one thing which Ukraine have not been short of in the last year.
And that's certainly going to be the focus of Rishi Sunak's words today when we have that minute's silence at 11 a.m. He's going to talk about the priority for the West to send aid to Ukraine. So what's the latest with the Challenger 2 tanks? Because they have been sent, haven't they? They should be arriving in the next few weeks. But there is going to be this additional pressure that Zelensky has always asked for, is support from the air as well.
Well, you really need 3 things. You need the combined arms capability, which the tanks will help you to have, along with all the things that you need, the artillery, the engineer support to break through the Russian lines, air defense. You need precision strike, and the Americans are giving 150-kilometer range weapons now. We may follow with a thing called Storm Shadow, which outranges that. And one of the predominant factors for success in 20th century warfare was control of the air. What we haven't seen yet on the Russian offensive is mass use of air power. That enables you to move. So air power is crucial if you want to move. But the Russians have been reticent, I think, because there is a very complex and dense air defense carpet really around the Donbass, and moving and trying to provide close air support means you often get shot down quite quickly.
How concerned are you about, in terms of where this goes over the next year, and let's hope it's over by then, but who knows? How concerned are you about what is happening between Russia and China at the moment?
Less so than most people would think at the moment. Now, China has tried to keep a neutral position. So, for example, in the UN General Assembly yesterday, it didn't vote against the invasion. It was one of those that stood in the middle. So China always looks at the consequences of what might happen to it. It's the calculation of consequences. And the Americans would probably enact economic sanctions if the Chinese did support the Russians with lethal aid. And the key thing for the Chinese is always that they've got 600 million people in their population who earn less than $100 a day and need to be fed. So any sanctions that may mean that their sort of supply chains are weakened mean that they would look at those consequences very carefully. Now, today there are some sanctions already going on for those Chinese companies which have provided some material support to enable some munitions to be manufactured by the Russians. But at the end of the day, the Chinese always look at it from a pragmatic perspective, not this perspective, as they said on before the invasion, that there's a no limits partnership. That is just rhetoric from the Chinese and Russians at the Sochi Olympics last year. That's not the reality of how international power actually works.
How do you think Zelensky and Putin are feeling waking up this morning? Because, I mean, if you think about Putin, it was this special military operation, wasn't it, that he embarked on a year ago today that was meant to last just a few days, perhaps just a few weeks. And then Zelensky was meant to be flown out to the US or somewhere safe, and he instead has stayed on the ground and become this unlikely war leader, hasn't he?
That's right. I think both of them wouldn't have slept very well. But of course, the initial thing from Putin's perspective that this was going to be a thunder run to Kyiv, and the war would be over, if not in 3 days, within a week. And Ukraine, in terms of the Russian grand strategic objective of regaining lost territory and spheres of influence, would have started. And then he would have bitten and held in Ukraine and probably gone on to look at going into those Bucharest 9 countries. Those are the ones that border Ukraine. So it's been a strategic disaster at the moment for Russia. From a Ukrainian perspective, one of the tenets of leadership which Zelensky demonstrated straight away was, I don't need a plane to go to Lvov. I need ammunition. So he's been a war leader, first-class war leader. But, they're the pygmy against the sort of giant still. So he would worry every day about the future because they need that continuing security assistance from the Allies in order to prevail in the future and to have a just peace, which is what this war is really about from a Ukrainian perspective.
Well, I mean, as you say, that is key. But there are problems with that, aren't there? I mean, not least that the UK, as we've been hearing over the last few days, I mean, our munition stores are actually ridiculously low at the moment. We're going to face a problem pretty soon, aren't we?
We'll always keep sufficient stores to ensure that we have enough combat supplies to fight independently if we need to do so. The real one to look at, of course, is that the Americans have provided $30 billion worth of military support, and they've also said that their stocks are at such a level that they wouldn't be compromised should there be another war which were to break out. And indeed, what we might see in the next year, that this becomes a war of inventories and the industrial war. Now, the guy who heads the logistics in America is a guy called Doug Bush. The production rate accelerating in America means that they will always outproduce the Russians, and that's America alone before the Europeans get their act together. What it does show, though, I think, is that there is a lack of European strategic autonomy and how much we still rely on the Americans.
OK, Chip Chapman, really good to see you this morning. Thank you very much indeed.